Garibaldi carries Anita up the stairs of the farmhouse, calling for a doctor. She's pale, foaming at the mouth. They've been on the run for weeks, and she's 6 months pregnant with malaria. When they'd left Rome, Garibaldi had 4,000 men at his back, but now it's just he and his wife. For weeks, his Redshirts skillfully evaded enemy units, but after the Austrians finally caught up to them, he released his soldiers from service after a short skirmish. For his troops had no food, worthless paper money, and were reduced to confiscating rations and funds from peasants and convents. Finally, his remaining followers kidnapped several boatmen and insisted on being taken to Venice. But when the Austrians caught the other boats, the kidnapped sailors put Garibaldi ashore. Then Anita and Garibaldi wandered in search of shelter, finally arriving at a supporter's house with a bed upstairs and a doctor on the way. Though neither will be needed, for by the time Garibaldi reaches the top step, his wife, his partner in revolution, is dead. Thanks so much to Wildgrain for supporting today's historical tale. With the First War of Italian Unification lost, it was clear Garibaldi could not stay in Italy. For a while, he knocked around in disguise, at times even dining next to Austrian soldiers until he made it to Piedmont, where he was both a pariah and an embarrassment. You see, with King Charles Albert having abdicated after losing to the Austrians, his son Victor Emmanuel was still unsteady on the throne. And if he wanted to build strength to continue unification in the future, he really couldn't have a radical like Garibaldi around. However, he couldn't exactly arrest him either, since the general was a massively popular figure. So instead, he gave Garibaldi's family a pension, because he can't really give one directly to a wanted rebel after all, on the agreement that he'd just sort of go away. So for nearly a year, Garibaldi shopped for places to spend his exile, before he finally realized where he should go: New York. It was a logical choice. New York City was a magnet for European immigrants at the time, particularly those fleeing after the largely failed revolutions of 1848. Staten Island had a large Italian community, and it was there that he lived, working in relative obscurity as a candle maker and living with Antonio Meucci, who is sometimes credited with inventing the telephone. Eventually, he managed to get command of a trading vessel, re-entering his favored profession, and for 2 years, he plied the Pacific trading routes from Chile to Australia, New Zealand, and Hong Kong. Then, seeking some connection, still grieving Anita, he traveled to Peru to visit Simon Bolivar's famous lover and fellow revolutionary, Manuela Sáenz. Though he steered clear of Europe, at least until 1854, when he landed a load of cargo at Newcastle, and was gratified to find himself being greeted with popular acclaim. So, piggybacking off that good mood, he continued on to London in hopes of making political contacts. Because these days of wandering were not actually aimless. Both in the United States and in Britain, Garibaldi proved himself a savvy operator. He whipped up interest in the Italian-American community towards supporting the revolution financially, and did the same with the British, support networks he'd later call on when he needed military funding. Garibaldi especially admired the British, or at least that's what he told them, piling huge amounts of flattery upon the British government, its people, and studiously avoiding controversial positions. For instance, when asked if he supported Irish independence, he said no. Nor did he criticize the British government for its actions in the Great Famine. This was partially due to his anti-Catholic bias, since Garibaldi often cast the church as his enemy and was known to seize church property. But it was also a canny move to keep the British in his corner. Also in Britain, he made contacts of a more secret nature. Himself a Freemason, he paid special visits to British Masonic lodges, giving him more access to more powerful circles, like an introduction into the Ordo Extra Historia! No? Too much? Sorry. Anyway. Garibaldi returned to Italy in 1854, the political situation having outwardly calmed, in order to claim a large inheritance from his brother. Seeking a place to settle with his children, he bought the northern half of an island near Sardinia and built a sprawling South American-style farmhouse. And there, he lived a quiet life, taking guests and corresponding, shaping the autobiography he'd co-author with Alexandre Dumas. His romantic companion during this time was a German journalist and novelist, writing her own biography of Garibaldi. He actually proposed marriage to her 3 times, but she refused him each one, herself having been married twice before, and also Garibaldi had just fathered a child with his servant, so yeah, you can kind of see where she's coming from. And this is where we should probably discuss a topic we've been skirting around the last 3 episodes: the myth of Garibaldi. Giuseppe Garibaldi was an enthusiastic promoter and fashioner of his own myth. Many of his adventurous episodes from his life, some of which we've recounted, come solely from his autobiographies and at times defy logic. For instance, did his wife Anita, when 5 months pregnant and extremely ill during the siege of Rome, really give a rousing speech before helping lead a crucial last-ditch defense? I mean, probably not. Likewise, some of his battles, told as epic, bloody clashes, would involve suspiciously few casualties. So, was Garibaldi a lying liar who lies? Was he not the hero he's portrayed as? Well, for our part, we think that's not the most interesting question. What gets our noodle baking is why Garibaldi portrayed himself this way. He was an extremely brave soldier and political idealist, but more than anything, Garibaldi was also a showman. He was a great communicator and worked hard to project an image that would attract international attention, funding, and recruits to the cause of Italian unification. He knew how to strike a heroic pose, to give a good speech or an action hero one-liner, how to take a good photograph, and especially how to shape media perceptions of his actions and revolutionary mission. He took the political struggle to create a country and imbued it with the romance and tragedy of a Verdi opera. And he was in very good historical company in doing this. Napoleon did much the same, as did George Washington. Revolutionary politics in this period often revolved around big figures that came to symbolically represent the ideals they stood for. And Garibaldi was savvy enough to play that role perfectly. Of course, he wasn't the only Italian doing so either. For instance, Mazzini theatrically wore black his entire life, quote, in mourning for his country. Also, if the way that Garibaldi is spoken of seems sort of saint-like, that is not an accident either. Though he was highly anti-Catholic, Garibaldi adopted the language of the lives of the saints, which were very familiar to Italians. He spoke of Anita's death and the death of his men as martyrdom, and emphasized stories where he miraculously escaped unharmed despite huge odds. Again, this doesn't mean that the events didn't happen. He just told these stories in a way that emphasized their impact. Basically, he would have killed it on Instagram. But all that said, he would soon actually have more war stories to tell, for the unification struggle was about to reignite. The Prime Minister of Piedmont Sardinia, Camillo Benso, Count of Cavour, is sometimes called Italy's Otto von Bismarck. Ever since Piedmont's defeat by Austria in 1849, he'd set in motion ambitious plans to liberalize society, reform the economy, and especially gain powerful foreign allies for a new bid at unification. In the final case, he picked Britain and France, and had spent years buttering them both up. Piedmont Sardinia had even sent a force to the Crimean War in order to get a seat at the negotiating table afterward. But it was one incident, which Cavour actually had nothing to do with, that changed French-Piedmontese relations forever. January 14th, 1858, Paris. Napoleon III and his wife chat in their carriage on the way to the opera. They're seeing William Tell, a piece by the Italian composer Rossini. Napoleon likes Italy, even supported Italian unification in his youth. Now, however, things are more complicated. What was that? A detonation? Horses whinny and rear. Napoleon looks outside and sees a man in the crowd throw an iron grenade. It rolls directly under his carriage. The floor lifts. Shrapnel cuts through the ankles of the guards standing nearby. Napoleon stumbles out, helping his wife. And when it's over and the man is stopped, 8 people are dead on the street and over 150 injured. As the royal couple continue on to see the opera. After all, why let a bloody terrorist bombing get in the way of a good show? Police fan out to arrest the conspirators. They turn out to be Italian nationalists, tied to Mazzini, and this action will deeply affect Napoleon's policy toward Italian unification, but perhaps not as you might think. Because after receiving an impassioned letter from the lead assassin urging him to support unification, Napoleon begins to wonder whether all this chaos in Italy could be tamed by ejecting the Austrians and having a strong French-friendly kingdom dominate the peninsula. Soon, Cavour will visit proposing just such a thing. They will bait the Austrians into attacking Piedmont, and France will join as an ally. And when this happens, Garibaldi will go back to war, launching a stunning military campaign that will eventually become legend. That's right, y'all. Next week, we're talking the Expedition of the Thousand. But that part of our story is still baking at the moment, so while we wait to see if Garibaldi and his men rise to the occasion, I'd like to tell you about something awesome I found I didn't know I needed in my life. You see where I'm going with this. By now, you all know I'm a big fan of services bringing deliciousness to my door, right? I've told you about things like meals and coffee saving my time and taste buds, but I've just found the next gem to add to my infinity gauntlet of convenient cuisine. This is Wild Grain, the first ever bake from frozen subscription box for sourdough bread, fresh pastas, and artisanal pastries that I cannot believe I didn't find sooner. Every item from Wild Grain bakes in under 25 minutes so you can enjoy warm, homemade tastiness whenever you'd like with no cleanup. Ooh, and bonus, if I could step away from these standardized talking points for a moment, my apartment, yeah, smells better than it ever has. I think my favorite Wild Grain delivery thus far has been their giant chocolate chunk cookies, which were a perfect snack to share with my D&D group. And they were so tasty that maybe, just maybe, they'll forgive me for what Strahd has planned for them next. So to build your own Wild Grain box full of classic favorites or delectable new, seasonal, and limited time special items, while also saving a bunch of dough, bread puns for days, just click the link in the description or scan the QR code right here and then use my code EXTRAHISTORY to get $30 off your first box. And you'll get free croissants in every box. Delicieux. Ooh, and bonus, with every new member, Wild Grain even donates 4 meals to the Greater Boston Food Bank, which I just love to see. Again, click or scan right here to have some Wild Grain goodness delivered right to your door, and then once you've saved some bread in more ways than one, check out our next video here. I gotta tell ya, Kuyakoi, Joseph Blame, Izzy Coin, Hunter Z, Fox Doc, Dominic Valenciana, Argalite Games, and Angelo Valenciana are just the best legendary patrons.